Welcome to the Creator's Journey with the Halfling and Spaceman. We love talking to creators about their journeys, and today we are chatting with Alexander Verbeek-van den Toren. I'm sorry, I'm reading it and I'm still messing it up. I apologize. Alexander is an author that writes both in and reads both in English and in Dutch. And his debut novel, Corruption, will be released in English later this month in January. Welcome,
Happy
Alexander.
to be here.
Well, we are very happy to have you. We appreciate you taking the time and joining us from far away. Uh, that's one of the fun things about doing this podcast is we do get to meet people from all over the world. So it's nice to be able to make your acquaintance, and we're looking forward to talking with you a little bit.
Likewise.
Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. Tell us a little bit about your formative years and how and when did you make the decision to really start writing professionally? Because I think you've done some short stories um, uh, before this novel is going to be released. So how did you start into the writing
How did I
professionally?
start getting into the writing professionally? Like, I've always written throughout basically all my life. My day job is a child psychologist, but I don't see myself as a child psychologist who writes. I see myself as a writer with a day job of a child psychologist. I started writing seriously when I was 16, and I'm 33 now, so I've been doing this for a bit. And I think whatever would have happened in the past, I always would have ended up writing simply because it's too much fun and it fits me just too well. And already when I was 16, 17, I was churning out stories like they were bad. Don't get me wrong. I was a teenager. I wrote really bad stories, but always with the ambition of I'm going to publish this someday. So what made me decide to write professionally? In the end, the answer is just I decided I liked doing it, so I decided to start doing it. And after a while, I became good enough that I was publishable. But I've written, you say I wrote a few short stories before the novel came out. That's true. But I started writing novels, and I've always done that. The short story thing is just something that happened on the way there when I started getting good ideas, and I was like, hey, I could write a book about this, but I could also just keep it in a short story and see what happens there. Because well, in the Dutch SFF community, sometimes it's a little easier to get a foothold with short stories compared to novels.
Mhm, mhm. So you always sort of had this affinity for
Yeah.
writing. Yeah. Okay. All right. Very good.
I think, like, for example, throughout my university years, when I was in university for psychology and I was writing my thesis, I was also always working on a novel. And at the time, there was a commute, an hour and a half between my parents' house and campus, and I would spend that on a train writing some more because that was my sacred writing time. So, yeah, I've always basically always done this.
Mhm, mhm. Okay. I think Spaceman's up.
Spaceman at the mic. Alexander, many of the people we talk to from around the world were drawn into their creative careers by some kind of fandom. Did you have any very specific fandoms when you were growing up that influenced you, like cartoons, comic books, or other media?
There was what eventually triggered me to seriously start writing when I was 16 was that I'd read the Historic Materials trilogy by Philip Pullman. I don't know if you've heard. The third book of that trilogy, it ends on a very heartbreaking note, and I was sad, and I wanted to fix that sad ending. So I started writing fan fiction to fix that sad ending and make it a happy one instead. Which, yeah, I published that online. It's thankfully it's gone because, like I said, I was not a good writer when I was a teenager. But that triggered me into, hey, this is a fun thing. Maybe I should write for myself as well. And
Mhm.
I'm specifically mentioning his Dark Materials because, hey, had it not been that book that made me so sad, I would have something else would have triggered me for sure. But what that trilogy showed me is that you can sometimes alter human nature in your stories to make a point. Because in the His Dark Materials series, everyone has a demon and sort of spiritual animal accompanying them, and that changed human nature in a way that's different from what we have because we do not have those demons. And that made me realize, hey, you can do weird things with fantasy. I want to do that too. Another example of fandom and how it's influenced my writing is I really like Doctor Who. That is a show I still avidly follow. Uh, and Doctor Who has
Mhm.
also shown me you can do some very weird things with science fiction, with aliens, with creatures, and it's okay as long as you have fun. And I think, yeah, Brandon Sanderson's novels have also played a big influence in my writing. I am a big fan of the Stormlight Archive, and it takes place on a very weird planet as well, and I really like that. So yeah, those would be my main influences, I think.
Well, did you did you take any classes in writing, to prepare yourself for a career in writing?
Uh,
Or are you part of any writers groups?
the biggest class I've taken is just the endless manuscripts still on my hard drive that I'm never going to publish. I've filled, as it were, so many times, and I've improved every single time. That has really helped. I have also attended 3 writing excuses retreats. There's a podcast, Brendan Sanderson used to be on it, the Writing Excuses podcast. And they still host annual retreats, I think, and I went there in 2014, 2015, and 2017. I got a lot of very good feedback, and I briefly stayed in an English writing group there, but at the time I was writing Dutch, so that didn't really work out. I am still in a Dutch language writing group, and we still meet online once a month. So that's all the classes I think that I took and the writing groups I've been in.
Alexander, that ties into the next question we have for you. So, what influences or what kind of things influence you and your writing?
Like I said, Brandon Sanderson plays a very big role in my writing. I think that also, like, thinking about what really influenced me and my writing, I think I'm mostly going into the weirder side of fantasy. I've really liked the fifth season trilogy by N.K. Jemisin, read all 3 of those books. And I also read a lot of queer fiction. That is not necessarily science fiction or fantasy, but still some very good books that also really help me in establishing, yeah, I want to do this, and this is how I want to write about queer things. Like Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston is a very good example of a book that I read every year and still really love. They Both Die at the End by Adam Silvera is also a book that definitely has influenced my writing, though I like to think that my work isn't as sad as that book. And also some smaller trilogies that I read, some smaller series that I thought were also very influential in my writing. The Worldbreaker Saga by Cameron Hurley is a very queer trilogy, and Shattering the Lay by Joshua Palmatier was also a weird world. And when I read that for the first time in 2014, I was like, huh, you can do that? You can write a fantasy world that is just not mappable to our own or to any time era? That's really weird, but I want to do that too. So when I think about books that make me go, I want to go in that direction, I think those books mostly.
It sounds a little bit like you're leaning a little heavily towards the magical realism side of of fantasy?
When I think of magical realism, I'm more thinking about stories that still take place in our world, and that's not where I'm going. Sometimes I
Okay.
do, but I'm much more into the secondary world fantasy kind of stuff. And like I love Lord of the Rings. Do not get me wrong, I love those movies in particular. But what really drives me is something that is not um, too heavily inspired by that. Something that is much more its own thing.
Corruption is your
Yeah,
first novel that's published. I mean, you've had, the short stories, but this is your first novel that's
correct.
coming out. Um, can you tell us anything about the next novel you might be working on?
Corruption is indeed, yeah, it's my debut novel, and right now, because I'm still working on promoting Corruption, I am not. I am working on a manuscript, but I don't know if that's going anywhere. That's just something to keep me occupied because I need to be working on something all the time, or I'll go nuts. But I have definitely have plans on writing a sequel, and I hope to be doing that this year to Corruption. I also
Mhm.
have a different story, a fantasy story that takes place on a world that is tidally locked, meaning that it's always the same side of the planet that faces the sun. Um,
Mhm.
I have the whole thing written and edited. It's only in the wrong language. So I'm going to translate that over, this year as well. See if maybe it'll find some a foothold in the English market. And I also have a manuscript that I want to edit. It's a horror novel, but that's firmly rooted in some Dutch laws regarding surrogacy. So I don't know if that's ever going to be translated, but I might publish that in Dutch.
Okay. Well, good. Good. It's nice to hear that you've got plans to follow corruption up, and hopefully that'll come to fruition. Um,
Alexander, every creator works a little
Yeah.
differently. Can you walk us through your writing process? How you start with the idea and you manifest the idea and then you bring it to the publisher?
I th- Most of my best ideas are usually two ideas joined together that don't work on their own. On their own, they are boring stories or they don't quite fit, but put together, and suddenly you've got the magic. You've got the story that makes sense. Like if I take Corruption as an example, it's a world where everyone is born with five crystals embedded in their body, and one of those crystals lights up with most people, and that decides their role in society. But my main character has two crystals lit up, and therefore he would be loath if anyone would find out. That idea of crystals was in my head, and it's interesting, but that's just world building. When I realized that I had a different idea in my mind still also going on, and specifically this was the idea of the whole world being built around magic, specifically magic portals to go from one side to the other, and then suddenly that magic stops working and society essentially just collapses and falls apart. Those two ideas joined together made Corruption work, because either of those on their own would not have worked for me, and would not have been interesting enough. So they usually start with two separate independent ideas that I then join together, and then suddenly it works. At which point I write a whole Word document, or at least with this story, and I'll probably do that in future as well. I wrote a whole Word document with just me rambling about the world and all the ideas that I had, and we can maybe fit this in, and we can fit this in, and we can fit this in, until until I'm tired of it. Basically, I just do a lot of world building, and I try to have everything make sense, and I try to think of all the implications of the things I'm adding to the novel. Once I've done that, I then start an outline. And that outline is usually very, very specific. It's an outline chapter by chapter. And I'm very specific on what I put in there so that I leave as little room as possible. And then, well, I wrote Corruption during NaNoWriMo 2020. So the moment November 1st rolled around, I started writing it, and I am a very quick writer with a good outline, and I make sure I have a good outline. I was done, I think, the 20th of November already. Like I said, I'm speedy. And then that was the first draft. Then I go do a couple other things, and then I go back, and then after a month or two, reread the whole thing, leave notes for myself so that because I have sort of fresh eyes now, and then I start working on how to improve the things that I spotted. I also send it to test readers, and this process happens a couple times until either I'm satisfied or a publisher says to me, "Hey, that thing, we like it, translate it to English, please," because then that happens, and then the whole process gets a lot faster.
Mhm.
So I think that's most of my process.
All right, I have a question because I only know English, but as a person who is bilingual who can write in at least two languages, do you find that improves your chances of finding a publisher?
No, I want to say no, but that's mostly because the Dutch science fiction and fantasy community is very tiny. It is, think the American SFF community in the 50s, but even smaller somehow. Because when we read science fiction and fantasy, and by we I mean the country, the Dutch people in general, usually it's English. And maybe it's translated. Sometimes it's not, because lots of us speak English as well. So why would a publisher translate? We are not that interesting for a publisher. So because we are so tiny, there aren't a lot of publishers here. I will say though, I said no, but thinking about it, it has gotten a little bit easier to get into the Dutch market, particularly with my short stories, because I can say a little that I've made a name for myself there. So I would say that being bilingual in that way has served as a bit of a step up towards here. Like I could practice with the Dutch people and then unleash everything on the Americans. That makes it sound more evil than what I intended to be. And it makes it sound like I don't take my Dutch writing seriously, which I very much do, but it's been a bit of a step up. I think that's the best way to put it.
Yeah, and that leads me to a little bit of curiosity. You've mentioned your short fiction
Yep.
several times. Do you have any really cool Dutch zines that publish science fiction?
Yes, actually, there is HSF, which stands for Holland Science Fiction, that publishes short stories twice a year. There is, and this is Dutch titles. There's Fantastische Vertellingen, which translates to fantastic narrations, which does the same thing. There's Ganymedes, which is a collection of short stories that you can send in something. The people running that collection are very, very critical. So it's always an honor to be let in. And there's Edge Zero, collection in which you can send short stories there that have already been published somewhere else. Then you are in the collection, and if you've written the best short story of that year, then you get a prize. And if you'll indulge me for 1 second, I'm a little proud.
How about that?
Congratulations.
Yay.
Congratulations.
Yay, that's great. That's great.
Yeah, the only prize we have is our cat.
Also a wonderful prize.
That is a wonderful prize, and she's staring at me like I just did
she's
something
decided
wrong.
she wanted to be part of the podcast today, so she's supervising us.
She's our feline supervisor, the feline overlord.
I am always happy to see feline overlords, but I'm not seeing them now. Is that possible?
No, she's
Okay.
on the floor. She's laying on the floor. She's she's just kind of looking around at things. um, but I did have a kind of a it's very related and similar to the question that Spaceman asked, which was um, in terms of what the people in your country consume, read versus what Americans read. And I mean, there are so many genres out there that, this may be a very difficult question to answer, but are do you notice similarities, differences in what readers consume here versus
Yeah,
there?
some at least. I would say that literary fiction in the Netherlands is comparatively bigger than it is in the States. And like there's a stigma that thankfully has gotten less and less over the years, that fantasy is mostly just, for children instead of for adults. And thankfully, we've got shows like Game of Thrones and books like A Song of Ice and Fire getting rid of that stigma mostly. But that idea is still, I would say, it's more prevalent over here than it is over at your country. Uh, if we read
Mhm.
fantasy and if we read science fiction, it's usually English anyway. In addition to that, I would say that a lot of my peers and a lot of people in my country unfortunately think Dutch is an ugly language. I have not made this up, it's really sad. And they would rather read in English, or they would rather read works by English writers, because Dutch is not a good language, not a pleasant language to write in, which I
Mm.
strongly disagree with. I say that as a writer who writes in English mostly, but I still very strongly have an opinion on that. But that's also a difference. I don't think Americans think English is an ugly language, but we're a bit apologetic about our own language. Um,
Uh,
so that would be a big
well,
difference.
yeah, I think one of the reasons we don't well, okay, maybe we should think English is an ugly language, because English is actually not even really a language. It's everybody else's language just kind of thrown into a pot and mixed around.
Honestly, though, every language is ugly in a way if you look at it like that, because every language is very, very difficult to learn, anyways. And I think English is beautiful, but I also think Dutch is beautiful, and I think every language is beautiful in its own right.
Every language is beautiful. Every person is beautiful in their own right, in their own way, and in their own
Also true.
time. But now we're to the point where we have to ask the most important question of the interview. And the halfling always gives me this question because she loves me so much.
It's not a bad question.
It's not a bad question. It's a great question. It's a great question. Alexander, where can people find out more about you and find your book?
They can find my book through the Space Wizard Science Fantasy website. You can buy it there. I am also active on Goodreads. I do not have an author website yet. That's somewhere on my to-do list, but I do all my marketing right now through my Facebook. And you can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/Aver, AVERNL from Netherlands.
Okay.
Sounds like we got a new follower there, halfling.
Yeah, yeah. And what about people that would like to read some of your short stories? Where can they find that?
All my short stories are in Dutch, so either you'd have to be Dutch
Oh,
or be a fluent
ah,
clicker of Google Translate, which fine by me. I am published on a few different sites. I can send you the links afterwards, and then maybe you can attach them somewhere. I do not have a central home where all of these are published yet.
We will put all of that in the show
okay.
notes. Sounds great.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we are about out of time, so I do want to thank you very much for again joining us today. We've had a wonderful time getting to know a little bit about you, meeting you, and talking about your your journey to becoming this writer that you are becoming and getting your first book out. Congratulations again on that. And we just hope that you will have continued success. Um, and thank you again for joining us. We've had a great time.
All right. Likewise.
And we want to thank our audience for joining us today, and we hope that you've been inspired and entertained by today's guest, Alexander Verbeek-van der Toren. And this is the Spaceman for the Halfling and the Spaceman podcast. Over and out.